Thank you. Before I turn this over to our moderator today, I just want to say, as I just briefly mentioned, at the end of today's presentations and the Q&A, we will then have some updates from some of our subcommittees in the one of them being on the UN IDOP and the planning for that, as well as the postponement of the open-ended working group, as well as WEOD, which is coming up, the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day observance. And lastly, on some of the issues for our partnerships, global partnerships. So now I'd like to introduce Frances Zinedin, who's the vice chair of our Committee on Aging, but also serves as the program subcommittee chair, who will moderate today's program on brain health. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Cynthia. My name is Frances Zinedin, and I'm the vice chair of the NGO Committee on Aging, and I'd like to extend everyone a warm welcome. Before I start, Megan, can you just check for Evelyn? She said she didn't get the access.
Okay, I'll double check. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Our other speaker is trying to get in. So today's event is on healthy brains, which is something obviously we all would like to have. And I certainly think that my brain is not always that healthy. Our first speaker is Dr. Jane Barratt, who's Secretary General of the International Federation on Aging. Population aging and disability across the life course have been Jane's passion and interest. Jane is a Winston Churchill Fellow and recipient of the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in Canada in recognition of her commitment and passion to enhance the understanding of issues relating to aging and engaging in dialogue with governments and the private sector to improve the quality of life of older people. Among her many current positions, Jane is a member of Vision Academy, Director, Baycrest Health Services, and Chair of the Education Advisory Committee, Associate Scientist, Sinai Health System, Member, Global Committee for the DR Barometer Program, and a member of the International Council for Adult Immunization. She was a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Aging, and until recently, Standing Selection Committee Chair for the Networks of All Centers of Excellence of Canada. With all these responsibilities, I don't know what time you have left, Jane, to do your work at IFA. Anyway, Jane will talk about the prevention of dementia. This really sounds uplifting and hopeful, Jane, so, particularly at a time of such doom and gloom with the COVID-19. Over to you, Jane, to give us your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frances, and it's a great opportunity to be with you today. Before I start on the presentation, I'd just also like to remark that, you know, there are almost 4 million people that have been diagnosed with COVID in the world today. And, you know, I also remember that there's about 270,000 people that have died that we know of. But, you know, it's just, isn't it odd? You know, I look out of the window, it almost feels like it's the end of the world because people are not going about their daily activities, you know, exercising and hugging each other and talking with one another, because, you know, the normal part of our lives is still going on. You know, in the time of COVID, I know that I have 2 members of my family that have arrived. Emily Louise has arrived and Harry Daniel has arrived to my nephews in Australia. But also people that we know have died not of COVID, of family and friends, and they are very particularly in my thoughts and prayers at this time, because the whole process of grieving for our loved ones is lost in this pandemic. I want to also acknowledge the work of the UN reps in the United Nations, the IFA reps, and on the call today we have, you know, Cynthia and Frances and James and probably, you know, others, but I have great friends and colleagues, including, you know, Erica sitting on the call and Katie Wise and many others. So it's a great privilege to talk with you. This is a very bold statement, isn't it? the treatment for dementia is prevention. And it was really not mine. It comes from Dr. Mia Kivipelto, and she is the principal investigator for the Finnish geriatric integrated study to prevent cognitive impairment and disability. Now, Mia is 1 in a million. She runs the FINGER study, which is an international study, and it was her statement that I grabbed hold of, because we do need to think about the treatment for dementia as a preventative process that we can be part of. Thanks, Megan. The reason that I'm talking about this and reflecting on it is that IFA is an organisation whose goal is to drive an agenda of the world's population ageing. Next one. And you can see who we are and what we are. We have general consultative status at the United Nations and formal working relationships with the WHO. All of our work, all of our portfolios, whether it's brain health or vision health or vaccination, hearing health, is in the context of functional ability and healthy aging. Thank you. And so, next one, that's it, thank you. And so for that reason, we need to actually talk in the context of, UN and WHO plans and reports, because this gives us a very important reference, or the way that I say it is, it's a hook to make sense of what we're talking about. So we have up on the screen, a number of reports and goals and plans that this particular subject area fits into, hooks into. Next one. And most particularly, the World Report on Aging and Health back in 2015 really put a line in the sand as to the way that we think and talk about aging. Those that have been in this field for decades, like I have, will know that once upon a time we talked about positive aging and successful aging and active aging, and we've been around the traps in talking about aging. And, the World Report, spoke to us really about the intrinsic capacity of an individual and the environment in which we lived in. And it was this interconnection between intrinsic capacity and environment that gave rise to functional ability. And so that's really, the intersection is the most important part of this conversation. The decade of healthy aging, which was endorsed at the executive board of WHO in February, and a resolution really was also for it to be considered by the UN Secretary General in September. And there are 4 key action areas in the decade. One is something that we're talking an awful lot about in this era of COVID, and that is the way we think, feel and act about aging. We know it as ageism, discrimination, prejudice. So that's one key area. The second is long-term care. The third is primary integrated care. And the fourth is age-friendly cities and communities. Now, I could create a narrative for any one of those action areas in the context of brain health. So that's what I'm going to talk about with you today. Next, thank you. So just as a reminder, this is the definition of healthy aging from a WHO perspective. The key words that I'd like to point out is process, function, and enables. So healthy aging is a process. It's not a one point in time. And if we were very clever, we would think of it as the time of birth all the way through to death, because we're evolving all the time. The environment in which we live in can enable us in terms of our healthy aging. And cognition is one of the major predictors of functional ability. Thank you. We also look as individuals, first of all, the intrinsic capacity, which is the age, sex, constitutional factors, the decisions that we make for ourselves. We know that there are factors that impact our ability to live healthily, such as smoking and drinking, the sugar levels, So we know that there are decisions that we can make around our health. And then there are layers. We also talk in this time much about equity and inequity in the time of COVID. But take COVID away for a minute, and those issues of inequity, you know, really create boundaries, almost indivisible boundaries around certain subpopulations, and that will become clear as I go forward. Thank you, Megan. The IFA, you know, one of the ways that we work is to bring unlike together. We work across disciplines and across sectors, and we're keen to give life to emerging issues. And one of the emerging issues that we gave life to was this concept of cognitive reserve in a think tank in 2017. And then following that, you know, we had, yep, next one, Meg. You know, we had the Copenhagen summit. So it's the reflections of this summit that I'm going to talk with you about. Thank you. Points of reference, you know, very clear. You know, I bring the point to 47 million live with cognitive impairment today in the world. But this 47 million, many of them live in the community. So it's more common than not, although we know that the annual dementia costs alone are significant, and we believe that they're increasing. Next. So what do we understand by cognitive decline, and what happens? You know, when cognitive abilities are viewed in a snapshot over a broad age range, the picture is very stark. But we also know that on average, year on year, most mental abilities, including memory and problem solving, appear to decline in a steady fashion, unless there's some organic changes. You know, a very different picture emerges when individuals are tracked over time. So across 10 to 20 years, cognitive abilities tend to follow at least 3 major trajectories. One of them is there's no dramatic change in cognitive ability. The second, there's a slight decline in cognitive ability. And the third, there's a steep drop. And, you know, personal anecdotes are very obvious to me. So my mother, Billy, is 92, living independently and living alone for the first time ever in her life since childhood. So cognitively, you know, she has tremendous capacity, and, you know, one has to ask why Billy does, because mum left school at the age of 14. So, you know, there are decisions that mum has made across the life, you know, that give rise to some of her ability cognitively. So next, please. Meg? Okay. You know, cognitive reserve, it's important to actually understand what the definition. Cognitive reserve can actually build up voluntarily and involuntarily to, you know, and it's about the stimulation of environments throughout the lifespan. So we, as, you know, whatever age we are, we can continue to actually build our bank of cognitive reserve. So think of it like a bank. So I can build my bank up still over time. So the ability to build the bank doesn't stop at 60. And that's why lifelong learning, intergenerational programs, you know, learning a new language at any age, you know, the novelty of learning is critically important to building up our bank of cognitive reserve. You know, at a policy level, though, it really doesn't get the recognition that it really deserves. It should be promoted, protected, and cultivated. But with many preventive promotion programs, the investment is just not there. You know, we know that less than 5% of OECD countries, is it 5, Meg? 5%? Is it 5? About that. Yeah, Meg says, yeah, nodding. About 5% of countries in the OECD invest in promotion and prevention programs, right? 5%. We also know in times of austerity, that budget is one of the first to be cut. So we know that individuals can build their cognitive reserve bank, but we also know that governments don't tend to invest in prevention and promotion programs. Thanks, Meg. So this is very self-explanatory. I won't speak to the text, but if we're saying that the cost of dementia is X, then it seems to me that we need to be putting a significant investment into building up the population's cognitive reserve, because that also speaks to the functional ability of a person to be able to live independently, as well as them being able to continue decision making. Because as we know, people with cognitive impairments, their decision making capabilities are diminished, which then needs services to be inputted. So now is the time to consider not only strategies to support those with dementia and cognitive impairment, but also to invest in cognitive reserve programs. Thank you. You can ping that again. All right. So here we get down to some of the critical factors, and this work is in Lancet, and what it shows is that 30% of changes in cognition are due to these factors. And these factors, diabetes, obesity, depression, hypertension, etc., some of those are within the purview of individual responsibilities. And so we can see that, there is an opportunity, to not only maintain, but improve your cognitive reserve bank. One of the key aspects that all of the professionals talked about at the summit was low educational attainment. And if it could be that every child in the world was given the opportunity of education, literacy, then that would dramatically impact the prevalence of dementia. Thank you. Right, so this is a really interesting piece of work that's done, and this is part of the international study. So if we just go over to Latin America, we can see that 56% of the factors contributing to dementia are modifiable. If we look at India, 41%. If we look at China, 40%. So these are evidence-based studies, population-based studies, that have been able to model the impact of potentially modifiable factors. So, sorry, go back, Megan. I'll just explain that. All right. No, next one. Perfect. All right. So if we look at India, for example, we've got low education. So that's common across China, India, and Latin America. There's a relationship between hearing loss, vision loss, and cognition, leading to dementia. And Megan Acton is the person at IFA that's leading the work on hearing impairment. And we have a summit later this year, to speak about the relationship between hearing, vision, and cognition. We can also look at the modifiable factors in the bottom part of that image: smoking, depression, inactivity, isolation, dementia. Whoops, I've lost it. Okay. So they are all similar in terms of the impact. So if we go back and think about where we are with the pandemic, you can see that, those aspects, those social aspects, are really modifiable within a framework of dementia. Thanks, Megan. We just now move into what I think is the global action, and that's to promote social policies, and that will require significant investment. Secondly, to advance a new narrative. The narrative we have around brain health or cognitive reserve or cognitive health is Sudoku's going to do it. Well, let me tell you, Sudoku is not going to do it, right? And so we've got to have a broader plan that is seriously embedded in public health action. Just the same as we have, you know, programs to maintain bone density, you know, where are the programs to actually build up your cognitive reserve bank? And finally, the third, and to coordinate a global action plan. And just one final remark, and that is that, oh, next slide, Megan. Okay. This is a really important article that I came across. And it was certainly about, you know, people with dementia within the environment of coronavirus pandemic. But also what Mia Kivipelto was saying is that all of these studies around the world have actually stopped now. They've stopped in the time of the pandemic. And, you know, that's something that I really took great interest in, because these are longitudinal studies that have been going on to actually measure the impact of factors on cognitive reserve, which then impacts function, which then impacts the health dollar. And so we really have to think much more broadly, not only in COVID, but post-COVID, because these researchers, their funding dollars are going to be cut. And so we think of the Titchfield group, Erica, we think of the finger study, the pointer study. You know, these are the studies that we need to invest in and to continue. And so at the same time as we're standing up for the rights of older people, you know, in terms of their human rights, we also need to think a little bit more broadly, and how can we support those scientists who are actually creating the evidence to build the case for a UN Convention on the Rights of Older People. So in closing, I just wanted to give a plug for our conference, which has been shifted to March next year. And Francis, thank you for the opportunity of being with you today.
Thank you, Jane, very much for all that information about the prevention of dementia and the risk factors that give rise to dementia. It is certainly uplifting, actually, and hopeful news that we can actually do something about preventing dementia. Many of the risk factors are also issues that need to be addressed, obviously, in order to keep healthy, just healthy, as we age. I'm sure there are lots of questions and comments, and I see a couple coming in, but we will address this after the next presentation, if you don't mind. So now, while Jane has discussed preventive measures, Evelyn Greenberg, representing Montesorri Internationale, we'll be discussing how to use the Montessori approach to engaging older adults who are suffering from memory loss and sensory impairment. The aim is to keep people with dementia functioning at their optimal capability. Evelyn graduated from LaGuardia High School of Music and the Arts and Hunter College. She has received a diploma from the association, or I should be pronouncing it in French, maybe, Association Montessori Internationale, and is the founding director of the Fort Lee Montessori School. She is also the founder of Museum Moms Program at her children's school, the Liverpool Museum Memory Program in the UK, and is the chair of the Bergen County Children's Advisory Board, and a member of the National Black Child Development Institute, the New Jersey chapter, and a docent for the Metropolitan Opera Schools program. Evelyn studied with Ms. Lakshmi Kripalani, a former student of Dr. Maria Montessori, who founded the Montessori method of teaching of children, which includes intellectual as well as behavioral and moral aspects of education. Dr. Montessori's philosophy is, do not tell them how to do it, show them how to do it. If you tell them, they will watch your lips move. If you show them, they will want to do it themselves. So Evelyn will talk about the Montessori methods for older persons, showing and not just telling older adults with dementia how to do things. Over to you, Evelyn. Thank you for coming.
You might have to unmute yourself, Evelyn.
Unmute.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. My 92-year-old grandmother regularly slaughtered me at Scrabble, muttering afterwards, and this girl graduated college. Not until my very intelligent mother-in-law developed Alzheimer's and spent her last 9 years of life living at home with a caregiver, that I really began to deal with a person with Alzheimer's. I spent, after having been trained by a student of Maria Montessori's, I spent many decades teaching 2.5 to 6-year-old children as an experienced graduate of Montessori training. Dr. Montessori had been the first woman doctor in Italy, started her very first school in 1907 in Rome, in the slums of Italy. These were children who had never been approached as fellow human beings. They were allowed to remain with certain self-selected materials and activities until they were satisfied with having completed them. And then with great reverence, they would put these materials back where they belonged. They acquired social graces, learned how to take care of their basic hygiene. A worldwide movement followed, which is now functioning in so many countries of the world, from the affluent in New York City to the far reaches of the Torres Straits. Young children have thrived in Montessori environments. People with memory loss, whether they live in their own homes with a caregiver, with an adult, child, attending respite centers, or living in nursing homes, thrive in an atmosphere where they are taken seriously as a person. We all wish to be dealt with respect, with dignity, with equality. I recall visiting a friend whose child had attended my school years ago. Her aged mother, the grandma, had Alzheimer's and lived with the family. As my friend and I shared coffee, her mother carefully took a tray to the end of the kitchen table. The tray had a soup bowl of assorted dried beans. One by one, Grandma sorted the beans into the 4 or 5 small bowls surrounding the larger soup bowl. It took a long time. When she was done, she returned the tray. She then took 3 placemats to the dining room, put one in front of each of the 3 chairs. After a while, she went back to the kitchen. One by one, placed each piece of cutlery on the indicated spot. Did I mention that the placemats were had a template on them where each piece of cutlery or dish should go? Eventually, in her own time, the dishes, the cups, the saucers were carried one by one from the kitchen into the dining room. I understood that my friend had observed her daughter in a Montessori school and had taken some of those ideas and put them in use in home. She transferred many other activities and ideas and used them at home. And Grandma was a valued member of the family and contributor to the functioning of the household. Never help a child with a task at which he feels he can succeed. And this is probably true of all of us. If we change the way we present a task, people can complete the task, especially if they have the gift of time. After all, what's the hurry? This is not always possible in a traditional nursing home center where staff is expected to get each elder dressed, medicated, washed, and ready for the day. Staffs need training in adapting to the Montessori way of doing things. Many of the same activities that we use with the very young are adaptable for the use of our elders. There are practical life activities such as pouring, sorting, washing a table. In a Montessori preschool, there are 54 steps in washing a table. And children simply incarnate them and do them and don't realize what's involved with that step. In the adult daycare centers or nursing homes, we focus on preserved skills and hobbies, embroidery, screw driving activities, locks and matching keys. As with the young children's materials, these materials are carefully arranged on trays, often with a color-matched mat. Activities vary based on the interests of the adults. There may be a tray with assorted teas, coffees, an arrangement of flowers with lots of vases that can be filled. Montessori preschools mix ages. Seniors in care facilities also have mixed abilities and may help each other, even teach each other. Homes, daycare centers, and nursing homes utilizing the Montessori methods enable people to be as independent as possible. We focus on capabilities, not deficits. We refresh skills that have been lost with fine motor activities. Completing simple tasks leads to self-esteem and feeling valued and needed. Rather than doing for our elders, we encourage doing for oneself. Even at home, we may label objects in the bathroom, for example, the toothbrush, soap, cup, washcloth, towel. We use lowercase letters and we make them quite large. We write out daily schedules for those who repeatedly ask the same questions. We can refer these persons back. Look at the schedule. Eventually, they may refer to those printed schedules without prompting. Brooms, pails, dust cloths are always available for folks to keep their environment clean. It's really a journey that we're all on. We don't know about the destination, but I'm glad to be able to share some of what I've really only begun to discover discover about the multi-age applications of the Montessori method, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evelyn, for giving us an insight into the Montessori method for helping older persons with dementia to be as independent as possible so that they can acquire self-esteem and to have a meaningful place in their community and to maintain their dignity. It's all very interesting. Having a granddaughter who went through the Montessori method, I can see the difference. It is a wonderful method. And I think one of the things that you've showed us too is that we need time and we need infinite patience, I think, to deal with this. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions, except that we did have 2 questions from Robert Brent. Robert, do you feel, I'll read them out, but I think Jane has more or less addressed them in her presentation, but I'll just, are you happy with Jane's presentation, Robert? Or let me read out the questions anyway. So Robert had submitted 2 questions beforehand. And the first one is, how are you defining dementia? Are you defining it by brain pathology or by dementia symptoms? We currently cannot do anything much about brain pathology, but there are interventions that already exist that can reduce dementia symptoms. I think Jane had already touched on reducing risk factors to dementia. But anyway, Jane, would you like to say a few words about that?
Sure. Hi, Robert. How are you? I can see you on the screen. Look, certainly. Look, I'm not a neuroscientist. So no, we're not talking about brain pathology. We are talking about the opportunity to build the cognitive reserves that we have, so that should we in later life have dementia, then we have a bank that will then extend the number of years that we will have without the functional impact of dementia impacting our life, if that makes sense. But I'm happy to hear from you, Robert.
Okay, can I ask the next question, and then you, Robert can.
And Robert can talk. All right.
Yes. Only let him talk after we've had a chat.
Okay.
So Robert asks, how are you defining prevention? If you define dementia in terms of symptoms, there do exist interventions that can reduce symptoms now and thereby qualify as treatments. And I also think that Jane has answered those questions too. But Robert, yeah, if you would like to.
Yeah, it's really less about symptoms. You know, this is not about symptoms. You know, this is really about, understanding that from the time that we are born throughout our life, there are opportunities to build up our cognitive reserve. As we build muscles, it's about how do we build the health of our brain through what we do, what environments that we live in. And because of that, we will then have greater opportunity to be functional. So, for example, it's about me choosing that I'm going to have a healthy diet throughout my life so that I'm not obese. I remain active. So, it's as much the lifestyle factors and decisions that we make. And that's why Mia talked about the treatment for dementia is prevention, just the same as the treatment for influenza is influenza vaccination and washing your hands. And so it's a preventative program. Robert, did you want
Thank you, Robert. do you want to have a quick response to that before I ask other questions?
Well, yes. This is not really the time for me to make a long speech. I've written 5 articles on cost analysis that have been published, and I'm currently writing on a book on it. But in the work that I've done, I focus on symptoms, because the definition of dementia is activities of daily living. So it isn't brain pathology that all the medical people focus on. It's whatever it is, does it affect your activities of daily living? So it turns out you can have fibers and tangles in your brain, but not have any symptoms. In other words, you can carry on activities of daily living. And anyway, that's the focus of a lot of my work. So it's neither necessary or sufficient conditions. So people have the problems with activities of daily living, even though they don't have the pathology, but they still have dementia in the sense of their symptoms, not their medical pathology.
That really takes us back to where I started, which is about functional ability.
Absolutely.
So,
I think we're on the same page. Yeah,
we are. But you're much smarter than me, Robert. So, but I agree with everything that you say.
No, I just want to reinforce what you did say rather than platform for what I said, which is that to agree with that, they have these non-cognitive, non-pharmaceutical interventions.
Sure.
And the one that I've focused on, which I will start looking at the Montessori one, but it's tailored activity program. So that's where you have an occupational therapist. They come to the house of the person and the caregiver, and they ask the person what they most care about. So let's say they want to walk out on their own. So they have a phone, and so that gives some relief to the caregiver, right? The person with dementia goes outside and has a walk and all that. But let's say the person with dementia is apprehensive, that they have a phone, but what happens if it doesn't work, or how do they know how to do it? So what happens is that the occupational therapist finds out what the priorities of the person is, and then they focus on that. And so a bit like your 48 steps, I guess, or 49 steps to clean the table, various sort of steps to change things.
Robert, sorry for interrupting. Can you please wind down a little bit, because I have a number of questions that are coming up, and we need to be asking questions instead
Absolutely.
of making.
Yeah. So I just want to say that the tailored activity program is very similar to in intent with the Montessori one. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much. And that's a wealth of information there. And we look forward to hearing more about your writings, and if you could let us know. So questions for Evelyn. Has anyone written a manual or book applying Montessori methods to persons with dementia? And linked to that question, Sandy Timmerman has asked for some information on specific Montessori programs for older persons with dementia, and are they happening worldwide?
Yes, thank you for that question. I went to the trouble to Google Montessori for dementia, and there's literally a wealth of information on programs in many towns all over the world, actually. More and more nursing homes are beginning to study Montessori. There's a strong program here in the United States run by the Branch organization, Jennifer Branch, who gives tutorials, 2-day seminars on, I've actually taken it, on working with seniors. In Australia, There is Ann Kelly, who's very well connected with the Montessori organization. There are literally dozens. Look, in Montessori is often used as a tool to sell a program. It's good to investigate if they're connected with the association Montessori International or the AMS to determine whether that's the right program for yourself. There are many textbooks written. There's a lot of research going on. Jane may have come across some of it. Montessori Dementia, and you will find immediate gratification. Also, you're welcome to contact me if you need any assistance.
Great, thank you. Evelyn, is there an actual manual that one can purchase? Or?
Yes, there are several. One I just came across.
I mean, a Montessori manual.
Yes, there are Montessori
yes, okay.
manuals, the Montessori way. You know, there's so much research going on. That's an ongoing project. Just now they've come out with a manual on dealing with people with Alzheimer's to explain the pandemic to them, because people in nursing homes are suddenly restricted to their own rooms and don't understand what's happening.
Yes.
The manuals that are also clearly listed. There's a Dr. Kemp that puts out an outstanding program. The Branch, Jennifer Branch, as I mentioned, they all have very clear ways of, I think, Cynthia, I'd given you one of the books about how to actually present different materials to the older person. And it's almost like a preschool Montessori handbook, but it's intended for adults.
Thank you so much. There's also a question for Jane from Cynthia. How can we increase the 5% of countries to preserve or enhance cognitive function?
Cynthia, if I had that answer, you know, but I just want to put this in context a bit, because we can actually talk about the here and now and the prevalence of people with dementia. Right? We can talk about that, or we can actually just you know, do a bit of a scan and go, okay, how many people with non-communicable diseases in the world today? Because that's a predictive factor. You know, diabetes, heart disease, respiratory diseases, cancer. So how many obese people in the world today? What's the prevalence of obesity? Guess what? That's another risk factor. Right, let's actually talk about literacy. You know, what's the level of literacy in low and middle income countries? So if we think that the prevalence of dementia now is a concern, let's wake up a bit, because 50 years down the track, you know, it's so much more different. I also want to speak to a comment that Erica made about nutrition and mental health and food insecurity, because food insecurity is closely linked with obesity, closely linked with depression, anxiety, mental health, and those factors are predictors of cognitive changes. So, you know, I like you, look at the thousands that are lining up for food this very day, the millions in low and middle income countries that don't have food. So we actually have to think big and look at the problem, but also look at the opportunities. And going back to your, what is the ask? You know, what's the business case here? And it's a win-win if children can actually have an education.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much. This is certainly excuse me, a topic that we can spend a lot of time on. We have had some comments about the use of service dogs, for instance, to help those with less cognitive skills. So I guess that's another part of the measures to help people with dementia. I think that is about it. Yeah, I think when what Jane last said, something that Magda has raised, that the aging is a lifelong process, Magda says. For example, physical and mental stress in early age affects brain development in adulthood and into old age. So this whole life course approach is something that we need to focus on. And I think in terms of government policy, and what we are doing at the UN in promoting the concerns of older persons, we are stressing a life course approach to be taken by governments, that and also not to pit one group against the other, that government policy must deal with policy from cradle to grave.
Yeah.
And not stop at any particular age. And so this is something that we as representatives of our NGOs should bear in mind as we continue our fight, and it is a fight at the to get the rights of older persons to be protected and promoted. So I will take this opportunity to thank Jane and Evelyn very much for their presentation. And as Megan had said, this will be on the website and it's recorded. So you'll be able to get the information after the meeting. So thank you everybody for their input. And I will now turn the floor over to Cynthia, who will do some updating of information and eventually close the meeting as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And let me add my thanks too for our two speakers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Really great. I would like, there was a question on the chat, which was, will this be available after today? And yes, it will. It will be on the, when IFA finishes it, they will give it to us. We'll have the link for this whole recording. So the slides will be there for Jane's presentation, as well as the presentation itself and discussion. What I'd like to do is just a few highlights from some of our subcommittees. And I'd like to start with the UN International Day of Older Persons. This year we have a chair in the person of Martha Beil and a co-chair, Betty Levy. So I've asked Martha Beil if she would just give us an update on its theme and its planning, how we're proceeding with planning. So Martha?
You might have to unmute yourself, Martha. It should be in the bottom bar somewhere.
Right, forgot.
There
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a big year at the UN with all sorts of anniversaries, so we're trying to fit into that. This will be the 30th anniversary of doing an International Day of Older Persons, and it's the 75th anniversary of the UN itself. And in addition, there are some special years which are which have led us to the theme that we're using for the IDOP this year, which is this year WHO is launching the Decade of Healthy Aging, which should go from now till 2030, and it is also the International Year of the Nurse. And so we're going to try to highlight both those things, be about both those things, which of course in this special year with everything that's going on, it will all be partly in the context of this pandemic that has all to do with healthy and not so healthy aging and health for everybody else. So we have a program planning committee, and that includes Erica and Betty, my co-chair, and Tara Cortez from the Hartford Geriatric Scholar Program, and Mabel Bianco, an Argentinian epidemiologist who's been very active at the UN in women's affairs. And so we'll be meeting in the next couple of weeks. And we're planning on 2 tracks, which is complicated because of the year that we're in, so that we don't know where the UN's going to be. The International Day of Old, I should drop back, most of you may know this, but the International Day of Older Persons is officially around the world October 1st. And when we've held in-person sessions of IDP, which we still hope to do, we almost can never get October 1st because of space planning needs at the UN. And so if it is an in-person event, we will be somewhere in the first 10 days or so of October. We don't know what. And we don't know when we're going to know either, unfortunately. The alternative, of course, having seen how well meetings like this go, is that we will have a virtual event. And so we're doing that. And we've been meeting with UN DESA about our plans. And it's hard to say much else now, except to say, well, we'll take some questions, but expect to say that as we have more news, we'll be back to you.
Thank you, Martha. I'm very pleased in the close collaboration also when we do plan for the International Day of Older Persons, we work collaboratively with the NGO committee in Geneva and the one in Vienna. And everyone is going to plan their own program, but it will be around the theme of the decade of healthy aging, and some more or less involving the anniversaries of the year of the nurse or the anniversary of the UN, etc. But those conversations have also been ongoing. I'll next call on Susan Summers, who will give us an update on the postponement of the open-ended working group, as well as our next meeting, which will be in June, which will be the observance of WEAD, World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So Susan Summers.
Thank you, Cynthia, and hello, everyone. Thanks for the program. I'll just do a little quick update on the open-ended working group on aging, which has been postponed, but we're suspicious that it's really just been put off until next year at the very earliest, but we're working to try to hold their feet to the fire in the Bureau to make sure the postponement doesn't impact us any further than necessary. Although it was necessary, so we really can't blame them for that, although it sets us back. So we've had 10 sessions. This would have been the 11th session of the open-ended working group. And we were hoping to get to a very important point where we would have some movement forward and some agreement on some discussions that had been held in the past. So it's really unfortunate that that's not happening for another year. And who knows where we'll be next year. But meanwhile, we have asked you to help us with continuing advocacy. Cynthia sent out some letters to the whole committee and some templates asking for you to reinforce some of our requests to the Bureau. The GARAP, the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older Persons, that many of you also will subscribe to, belong to, whatever. Has also done similar advocacy mailings and asked you also to pick up on from your local networks or your local communities to send in some further pressure. We'll keep that up. Watch for our mailings. Thank you for your help. We are in constant contact with the Bureau and promoting our joint mission at all times. And Francis is working very hard on keeping that, the door open for you. So with that, then I'm just going to say briefly something about World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. I mean, some of you may or may not know that World Elder Abuse Awareness Day is an international day, similar to the International Day of Older Persons, National Day of the Nurses, etc. Not a year, but a day. And it was instituted after IMPAID, my organization, International Network for Prevention of Elder Abuse, proposed this together with IFA. Jane was very much involved in it back then and very instrumental in helping us move forward. Elizabeth Podnick's from Canada, it was her brainchild, and we managed to move in 2006, 2007, had our first day, and then after numerous years, became an institution. And we were able to convince the General Assembly that this indeed was an important issue for the world on a global basis, in addition to the National Day of Awareness on the issues of elder abuse, domestic and internationally, of all sorts. So thus we have it. We've been promoting the event in many different ways over the past several years, and always partnering with the Committee on Aging here in New York, of course, because many of us have been members and committee members, and we've been proud, of course. You also partner with Geneva and Vienna, as you said, with the Martha said with the International Day. And most of what Martha said applies to what I'm saying. So I'm just not going to repeat those pieces because an International Day, we work with DESA. This year, we're going to, we've been thinking because of the situation of COVID, at first it seemed a clear path, but then as more issues came forth and a lot of this backlash came against older persons and these decisions, these ethical decisions, etc., we were thinking of a broader experience. And I've been talking with Amal, we've done some brainstorming, and we want to leave our options open a little bit. We may have more than 1 hour-and-a-half program. We may have one early for here and then one for Asia at a different time. The original World Day, we started it in Tokyo with the sun coming up. We started the first program. Back then, all we had was a telephone to, we didn't have all this fancy gadget. So we were thinking about doing something so that we could involve people from around the world and not just from New York. And those were fortunate. So stay tuned. Francis is on my team, and IMPEA will welcome the cooperation of the Committee on Aging, of course, as we work with DESA, because we see this as our flagship moment, our event, IMPEA. It sees the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day as our responsibility, and we'll just continue to carry that mantle. So thank you.
Okay, and thank you. So save June 15th, the time to be determined, correct, Susan?
Right, at this point, June 15th, we don't know what's going to happen with the Human Rights Council. It's supposed to start the same day, and of course, we don't know what's going to happen. So let's just target the 15th, and we'll tell you when we know.
Right, okay, well, thank you. Lastly, I'd like to call on Erica Dar, who is the chair of our subcommittee on global alliances, to give us an update. Erica?
I think you're muted, Erica. They're not working?
Mm-hmm.
Bring your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, Erica.
Mine's on the bottom left, Erica. The mute, unmute. Don't do the one that comes up by your head.
No, I know.
Here we go.
No,
Yes.
sorry, but my Zoom disappeared, my screen disappeared.
Oh, because we saw you. All
Well,
right.
I will. Well,
Okay.
thank you, Cynthia, and sorry, everybody,
Okay.
for brief technical failures. Just to say that I'm meant to update you on the work of partnerships and what we're doing through the stakeholder group on aging, of which the NGO Committee on Aging is a member. So just for those who are not familiar, the stakeholder group on aging was established to monitor the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and to participate in the high-level political forum, which we refer to as the HLPF,
which is the intergovernmental body that follows up and reviews implementation of the SDGs. I just, you know, since we're not seeing each other in person, it's tough for me to know whom of you who are on this call are not familiar with the SDGs and, you know, the Agenda 2030. I advise you, if you are not familiar, to just take a look at the NGO's Committee on Aging website and the Stakeholder Group on Aging website to familiarize yourself with what I'm talking about. So the 2020 HLPF will be held from the 7th to the 16th of July this year. And as Martha was mentioning about IDOP, we are in a similar situation because of COVID-19. It is most likely that the HLPF will be held virtually. This poses many challenges, as I'm sure you might expect, given that we have to get representation from member states around the world, as well as other stakeholders, including civil society organizations. So we have a steering committee of the Stakeholder Group on Aging, and that committee comprises the co-chairs of the stakeholder group, which are HelpAge International, AARP. HelpAge is represented by Mariana, and AARP by myself, and Francis Zeinadin of IFA, who is our liaison at the UN. And through the steering committee, we participate in all the UN procedures and processes linked to the HLPF to ensure that the concerns of older persons are adequately acknowledged and reflected in key documents, in events leading up to the HLPF and to the HLPF itself. So, for example, we have submitted a position paper by all the organizations of the SGA. Currently, I believe we have 14 organizations that are part of the SGA, or the Stakeholder Group on Aging. And we submit a position paper every year. This year, the paper covers issues related to ending multidimensional poverty, social protection, lifelong learning, elimination of discrimination, reduction of inequalities, gender equality, food security, age-friendly cities, resilience to natural and man-made disasters, and investing in data and data statistics. We ensured representation of the Stakeholder Group on Aging at the 2020 HLPF thematic consultations. We were very lucky to get our Jane Barratt, whom you just heard from, the Secretary General of the IFA. The SGA nominated Jane to be on a panel, and she was selected, so we're very pleased. And the discussions will be focused on different aspects of advancing human well-being. The Stakeholder Group on Aging is also represented in discussions on the Ministerial Declaration, which will be drafted as an outcome document of the HLPF review. Mariana Rudge, as I mentioned earlier, from HelpAge, will be representing us in the preparation of the declaration. In terms of logistics, there will be no side events held at the UN during HLPF this year. Organizations who are interested in convening side events may do so online. We, as the SGA, have not yet decided how or whether we want to organize a side event. And if we do, it would have to be virtual. There's a lot of planning that goes into these sorts of things. So that's still to be decided. The information on the HLPF will be posted on the NGO CoA website and about the high-level political forum. You can take a look at that next week when it is posted. You can also go to the UN website, to the sustainabledevelopment.un.org. And as I said, currently, I'm not sure we've got the SGA website up to date, but yes, that will be another place for you to take a look at. So that's it from us for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If anyone has a question, just post it in the chat see if there's anything, or raise your hand. I'll call on you if I see you. We'll look, see. Don't think I'm seeing. Oh, there's a, let's see. Okay.
Cynthia,
the question about I did respond on the chat about and said the recording of today and the slides will be on, not immediately, but they will be available through our website.
Cynthia, could I just add
Sure.
that on the NGO CoA website, there is a list of key documents on COVID-19 and the impact on older persons. There are about 20 documents there, some prepared by HelpAge, Age International, and of course the reports that have just been issued by the Secretary General of the UN. So you could go on the NGO website to read some of those documents.
Great. Okay, perfect. And we just got a message from Amal Rafe, our chief of aging program at DESA, who said that the COVID-19 Global Humanitarian Response Plan now identifies older persons as a priority group. This update was launched today. So that is a good progress, and I know Amal has been working really hard. I know she worked very closely with the Secretary General's team on that document, the policy brief that was released. So this is all good and progress that's being made. So if there are no other questions or comments, Robert.
Erica?
Yes.
Yeah, Erica, do you think SDGs are still going to be relevant? Because with this pandemic, all bets are off, right? Hunger's going to quadruple, you name it, education's going to go down or whatever. So do you think the SDGs are still meaningful?
So that's a really good point that you raised, Robert, because we've been in meetings with member states and with the Bureau on the declaration for the UN at 75, and you know, this whole issue of the Secretary General's launching of the decade of the SDGs. As you know, we are now in we passed the 5th year. We're going to launch the decade for the next 10 years to 2030. And the point you raise is very valid. A lot of the progress that was made and the targets that were set are now in jeopardy in terms of where we will see the progress made will be rolled back. It's precisely the points you made around, you know, we're seeing increase in hunger, unemployment, you know, issues around health. So, but so that's, yes, that's a valid point. In terms of your second point as to whether the SDGs would be relevant, it's, the time is now more important for the SDGs in that it shows the inequities universally, right, in terms of development. And one of the ways that COVID has brought everybody together, and sorry, I'm just getting bombarded with messages right now. Sorry, I'm just putting my phone on silent. But one of the ways that COVID has really, to some extent, changed the way we think or should think is that we, the UN and multi-stakeholders, as you know, because of the high-level meeting in September, when we're looking to talk about the declaration that member states want to make, is what should the UN be, what should the UN look like in the next decade? We are now talking about a world which is no longer a global world, that is passé. We are an infused world. Everybody is going through everything at the same time. There is a difference because what is impacting us in the US is impacting countries all around the world at the same time. So it is more important for us now to be looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. How we may, I don't know how we can tweak things in terms of the targets, because the targets, as you know, were set. But these are conversations that member states will have to have, and Francis can help with this in terms of what you're hearing on the ground from the steering group. But in my dealings and my interactions, I do know that it is something that we're talking about, looking at the UN as a body. How innovative are we going to be? How it has to be more focused on people-centered, people-centric, which was part of the whole, you know, principles of the formation of the UN, we the people. So there's a lot of conversations and negotiations and discussions happening because everybody is very aware that it can't be business as usual. I hope I answered your question, Robert.
Okay, are there any other questions?
You want to pitch in?
Pardon?
Hello. Hello.
Does Francis?
Hi.
Oh, who's
I
that?
have a question.
Yes?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In domestically here in the United States, specifically in major cities, we see such a colossal failure, in my opinion, of government to foreseeably shepherd and, as a matter of law, social and public policy, to ensure that those who are in nursing homes and or rehabilitation facilities have a high degree of confidence in their wellness, and that their short or long-term stay in such facilities will not, in fact, be a death sentence. What we are seeing now, again, particularly in major cities in the United States, New York, California, etc., a widespread exposure and an externalization of the failure of government to protect those who need protection within nursing homes as well as rehabilitation facilities. So my question is, if this is the way that we as a society devalue the old and older and oldest amongst us, what does it say how we ourselves, an aging population, are willing to collectively disregard the fact of life that we too are an aging population? So that's my question. The contempt by government to disabuse their fiduciary obligation to protect the general welfare, health, and safety of all within its jurisdiction, and our collaboration and collusion in that neglect by our collective unwillingness to face the fact that we are all advancing in age. So that's my comment, and my question is, what do you think the committee can effectively do to spotlight that critical role of government and the UN as a body politic to acknowledge the role it plays in maintaining the well-being of those who need to be isolated. Thank you.
Well, I'll start and others may chime in. I think what the committee is trying to do is to bring to our attention documents such as we did on the Secretary General's COVID-19 response, and asking each of our NGOs that we represent at the UN to sign on to one of the letters that, for example, the Global Alliance on Rights of Older Persons has signed on to, and perhaps your own NGO could issue your own press release around signing on and raising awareness about this. I also think any organization can use, a case in point of a nursing home or a hospital that triaged, or in a way that was totally unfair, or that we don't have, or our staffs don't have personal protective equipment, etc. So I think that there are some mechanisms that when we're dealing with the UN, we have to go through the organizations that we represent. And what we as the Committee on Aging, what we're trying to do is bring those opportunities to you, such that, for example, Jane Barratt, you heard, did get appointed to provide input. I sent that out with her memo saying she'd love your input, your ideas, your thoughts. Then she'll come back with a suggested statement that then we can move forward and have our voices heard. So I don't know if Francis or Susan or Erica want to reply because of the groups they represent.
Yes, I can just add a few words. And of course, the Committee on Aging does participate through its members at various intergovernmental meetings. So we do bring these issues to governments. It's at the international global level, hoping and trusting that they will hear us and bring our concerns back to the national level. So the NGO Committee on Aging, through its subcommittees and through its members, are always encouraging members to participate. And our members, especially those with ECOSOC status, need to speak up. They need to participate in the Commission on the Status of Women. They need to participate in the Commission for Social Development. They need to participate in the Population and Development Commission, and in other events, to make our voices heard. And, we have, as Erica was saying, about the stakeholder group on aging, that was established in 2013, which is just a few years ago, when we managed to get issues concerning older persons into the 2030 agenda. It's a long haul, and it's everyday slogging, and we just have to persevere. I remember saying that I'm giving up. I just can't wait this long for anything to happen. And Susan Summers was always encouraging me to say, she's been at it longer than I have, and we just have to persevere. We are trying to get the members of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older Persons to act more vocally at the national level around the world, because they need to speak up and speak to their government officials there in order to get the message to New York, in order for the New York representatives of their countries to speak up. And I just want to say also that there is a United Nations group of friends of older persons made up of 24 member states that are trying to push our concerns forward and make older persons more visible. So there is action taking place, but we certainly need more support, and we need to make a big noise. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Well, I recognize that our time is up. And I once again want to thank the IFA and for Jane Barratt, for Megan Acton and Chesley Ryder for enabling us to have this virtual meeting today. I very much appreciate it, and we'll look forward to more details. And we're sharing them with you as we get them and asking for your responses. And we'll hope to see your faces on the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day observance that'll come up in June. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Megan, thank you for your help.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Bye.